Welcome back to Pathways to Participation, the podcast where every hiring decision becomes an opportunity to include. In episode 1, we unpacked one of the biggest barriers to inclusive hiring: fear. The myths, anxieties, and assumptions that quietly shape how we judge capability. Today, we build directly on that conversation. In this episode, we explore a powerful idea. Inclusive hiring isn't a solo act, it's a team sport.
Hiring is a system of decisions. It's a system and a series of players, of processes, and of preferences. And unless we see the whole system, we can't really design for inclusion.
And Sharna, this idea reshapes how we think about fairness in hiring.
It does. And most people picture hiring as one person making a decision. And usually we call that the hiring manager or a recruiter or somebody in the human resource function within the context of an organisation. So if we're looking at inclusive hiring as a team sport, it really works best when we recognise that multiple people shape who gets hired and who doesn't. Every player brings to the game, the hiring decisions, their own lenses, their own experiences, their own histories. Those experiences, their preferences, their comfort zones, their assumptions about people and people's behaviour, about work and workplaces, about outcomes and outputs, really shape how we decide who does and who does not get jobs. And together, they help us shape and understand what we mean to be considered talent within the context of our workplaces. So that leads us to a really central question for us to consider today in this episode.
Can I guess?
Yeah.
Who gets to decide?
That's right. Who gets to decide? So if we're looking at inclusive hiring as a set of decisions and where every decision is an opportunity to include, then who gets to decide who gets to be included in our workplaces? And who gets to decide who decides that decision making? Because access to opportunity isn't just about the capability of the actual individual. It is shaped by the structure, the people, and the systems around the processes. So I want us today in this episode to walk through the team members that influence hiring and to understand that there are way more stakeholders included than sometimes we realise. So let's start with the obvious players, which we touched on at the beginning, which is the idea that most people think that one person is making a decision, a hiring manager. So let's call them recruiters because that's often what we refer to them as. And I've actually been a recruiter, so I've spent more than a decade getting to decide who went through different parts of the screening processes. So if I put on my recruiter hat, recruiters are usually the people that are coordinating the hiring process. They're also the ones that kind of get to decide what happens and what does not happen within the context of that process. And we can kind of call them the gatekeepers. So recruiters, they manage the compliance, they help manage the organisational standards, and they're also the face of the organisation. So they're in charge of managing the candidate experience. Recruiters, however, they also get to make really early decisions about who advances or who we screen in to the selection process. And that can be through processes of giving them a call at the end of a job description. It'll usually have a recruiter's phone number there if you want to speak to them. So that recruiter is usually making those very foundational early decisions about who gets to go through to the next stages of selection processes and who is being filtered out. So at the beginning of the processes, recruiters play a really important role in opening doors to some candidates and closing doors to others. So the second one that we think about in terms of the team, with inclusive hiring being a team sport, are job experts. So recruiters and people in the human resource function, when they've got a job opening, will usually go and speak to and consult with people that we usually call job experts. These are people that have done the role before, are people performing the role, or have been supervising somebody in that role. And the reason that job experts are included in our team is because they tend to know what good looks like in practice. They tend to understand what it is that that person needs to have in order to be successful in the role and to actually execute the role. So the insights from job experts is really important because it does help us understand that selection criteria are real and not assumption driven about things that a recruiter or a hiring manager might think is important in the role. Job experts really get to have that negotiation part of telling us that that doesn't really matter, or these are the things that we actually really need them to be able to have or to do for them to be able to be a positive member of our team in a daily set of practices.
Sharna, it would be a leadership team as well within that organisation, likely a senior leadership team that would...
Yeah, absolutely. So particularly in the different types of businesses. So I myself and many of you listening would have worked for small and medium enterprises. Australia is built on a lot of small and medium enterprises. And when we think about that, we think about the idea that the team member is also those business owners, the people that actually own the business. So when we're talking about business owners being part of the team, they have a very different lens, because if they look at the organisation as their baby or something that they are responsible for and they're building and growing, then they're going to be looking at hiring decisions at a very personal, intimate level, because they are literally, for some of them, spending their money on you if they're bringing you into the organisation. So business owners in that way will think a lot more about operational needs and perceptions of fit within our hiring decisions. Because from their point of view, they're really focused on how someone will work within the team, how someone will contribute to the team-based environment of that organisation, whether they have perceptions of whether they can keep up with what's required of the work, and really, if we're honest, whether they think that that person is worth them spending their money on. So in smaller organisations, this means that sometimes the business owners might be the recruiter as well as the owner and might be the ones making the decisions. So when we're talking about who gets to decide, in smaller and medium organisations, that's a bit more obvious for us as candidates about who's making the decisions and who's the really important members of the team. Because if it's a small and medium organisation, the likelihood is it might be the business owner that is interviewing us, looking at our resume and making the final decision all in one. But that will be very different than if we're in a medium to bigger and larger organisation, because the role of the business owner at that point might really be played by the line managers. So again, those line managers are part of the team if we're in bigger organisations, because they're the ones that are, again, going to be using that similar lens to business owners in smaller organisations. They're going to be looking at candidates and their resumes and the way in which they interview around those operational needs and perceptions and expectations about whether they will fit with the team or contribute to the team and be able to generate the outputs, because for those line managers, they are tasked with and responsible for ensuring that the work really gets done.
The idea of technology, are you mentioning or discussing the merits of AI in any of this process now?
So technology is a big player in our hiring decisions. And as I said before, we don't talk enough about it, and we don't acknowledge the role that technology in different forms plays in deciding who does and does not get jobs. But I wanted to leave it to last because I wanted to really embed this idea with you that most of our hiring processes that we use include what we call an applicant tracking system. And within those applicant tracking systems, we have algorithms, but we also have criteria to make decisions about who we select in and who we select out. So although at the beginning we said that recruiters are the ones that are making those early decisions, in a vast majority of organizations today, those recruiters will be making those decisions with some form of technology, with some form of applicant tracking system. And so together, the humans and the technologies will be deciding who we screen in and who we screen out based on that criteria that we collect from resumes and the application process, and also your immediate responses. So when we talk about at the very beginning who decides, sometimes our hiring decisions are made by technology and we don't recognize the power that we've given to those based on the criteria that we have embedded in those systems. So technology might be at the very beginning the first decision maker in our hiring process, because organizations do have the ability to put in some criteria and go, Say, for example, anyone with less than 5 years of experience, we're just going to automatically screen them out. And by the process of automatically screening them out, all those other things to do with capability or your ability to contribute to the organization or explain to a human about why that might be the case doesn't come into our decision-making processes because we can automatically use that as a criteria to screen us out. So technology plays a really big role in a lot of jobs about who gets screened in and who gets out long before a human might actually be sitting down and reviewing your application and thinking about where we would put you into that screening processes. So technology is a really big player in this space. It's a really big player in the talent space, but it's also a really big player in recruitment and selection in the vast majority of organizations that are bigger than those small and medium enterprises where it's not the business owner that we're talking to. So I always like to tell any of the candidates that I work with just to be mindful at the very beginning of who is making those initial decisions and how we might actually ensure that we recognize technology as part of the team in inclusive hiring.
So if I could take one thing from today, Sharna, it's inclusive hiring. It works when the whole team shows up.
It's absolutely a team sport. And the first thing for us to help expand inclusive hiring is to be more aware and cognizant of the different stakeholders that are involved in the process that we talked about today. The second part of understanding inclusive hiring as a team sport is to understand that the preferences of those team members are absolutely going to be shaping our hiring decisions and helping us decide who gets the job and who doesn't get the jobs. So if we're looking at it from taking it to a team sport to us as an individual level, as employers, as decision makers, as recruiters, as customers, then we need to understand that many of our hiring decisions are shaped by our personal preferences. So the preferences of the people doing the selecting. So if we're part of the team and the team for inclusive hiring, then we have this fantastic opportunity to reflect on our own preferences about how people communicate, our own preferences about people's personality and whether we think that it's going to fit or not fit within the context of our team. We also can reflect on our preferences about what people look like, their educational degrees, which we touched on before, the idea of eye contact, but also those preferences, particularly around times of work experience or other aspects that are involved that don't necessarily relate to on-the-job performance. Because what we can do is we can look in and understand that our preferences to hiring and our preferences to on-the-job performance is where exclusion can actually creep in. So if we're trying to ensure that every hiring decision is an opportunity to include, then all of those different team members that we have in the process all have an opportunity to reflect and think about how they are at the individual level, making decisions that unintentionally exclude people with disability. And then on the positive side of that, how are we actually making decisions that help us include people with disability? And for us to do that as decision makers, there are 3 different reflective questions I have here for us to think about. One is, think about and reflect on what qualities and attributes do you value? And why do you value those particular qualities and attributes? Why does that particular set of qualities and attributes matter for that particular role? And again, do they really matter for the role, or are they just your personal preferences in how someone might actually complete the task rather than the job and the task itself? And the other thing that I want you to think about in terms of reflection are, what are your deal breakers? So when you meet candidates or you're involved in hiring processes, are there some things there that are deal breakers for you? And I want you to think about why they are deal breakers for you, and also what you can do to change your perception of those deal breakers. One of the fantastic questions I always had for my exec students is, what would it take me to change your mind? Because a lot of the hiring decisions that we make are based on criteria or screening people in and screening them out on things that are actually not related to the job. And sometimes they are associated with what we call deal breakers that should be easy to undo, or that us as team members of inclusive hiring can recognize that they're our challenges and our preferences, not ones we should necessarily place on our candidates and our hiring processes. And a lot of those deal breakers, if we're honest with each other, are probably ways in which we choose to exclude people with disability.
Blending research with real-world guidance. Executive Educator Dr. Sharna Wiblen providing practical ways organisations can redesign jobs, work and selection processes so more people with disability can participate and thrive. And in our next episode,
screening is really where inclusion can begin and where we can make a fundamental difference to expanding exclusive hiring. Because this is where exclusion becomes generally baked into the process, where we are filtering out and screening out people with disabilities long before we actually get to meet them.
Pathways to Participation, where every hire is an opportunity to include. This podcast series was funded by the Australian Government Department of Social Services. For more resources, visit online, Access to Work. That's the numeral 2, access2work.com.au. Thank you for listening.